Good morning. Thank you for joining us. You are watching KUHS The Stream on Malady Drive. It seems like I'm getting some feedback here. Let me turn down one of my microphones. How's that? Better? Let me see. Check, check. Yeah, I like that better.
Turn your audio inside the place. No, on the black. No, the black. There. Turn that down. Number 2. Go down. There we go.
Hey, love those technical difficulties. That's what live recording is all about. Hi guys, how you doing? You are watching KUHS The Stream on Malady Drive. I am your host of today's Weekend Boost show, Paul Lane. I am the author of The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story. Hey guys, if you would like to get a signed copy of the book, just reach out to me at the station. I am still working on getting my website built. Talked to some people this week, but still working on that. A couple of things that I want to talk about before we get started is, guys, I offer services. I'm going to be offering chemo care. So if you know someone who has cancer, someone who is really sick and wants a little bit of relief, I don't promise to cure anything. I don't claim to cure anything, but I can tell you this. Come see me. Give me an hour of your time, and I promise you, you will feel better, look better, or have a better sense of well-being when you're done. Also, the Weekend Boost is looking for sponsors, so if you are interested, if you have a business, small business, large business, we have about 119 visitors, 19,000 visitors every show. If you would like to get be one of our supporters and one of our sponsors, please reach out to us because we would love to have you on the show. Also, I am available for speaking engagements, MC, motivational speaking. I am at your service. Guys, the last thing I want to announce is Calma. Those of you who follow the show, all three of you, you know that I support Calma, the Colorado Alliance for Latino Mentors and Authors, 100%. Today I have a Calma author on board, and she has written this book, The Malevolent Nephilim. Lydia Avant, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Ortiz Avant. So you have put this together. This is a story that's actually part true and part fiction.
Right.
But this is a story that took place that you experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And I read through this book in this last week, and oh man, there's some really interesting things in this book. As I read the book, I almost waited to hear the music, the horror story music. Come on, because this book is a thriller. The Malevolent Nephilim. When I got this book and I sat down and started reading it, I know what the word malevolent means, but when I read it in that context, it was like, man, this really makes this to like another level of sinister.
That's a great word.
Nephilim. What is a Nephilim?
Well, they are offsprings of fallen angels, and
you scoot over here a little bit so you're in the camera.
they are a Nephilim in the Old Testament, Genesis especially is where I read.
Gotta get right up in here.
Yeah, you need to scoot in a little bit more in the screen. Sorry.
Keep going. Right there.
So they are. It's an offspring of in the Old Testament of the fallen angels and daughters of ordinary men. Mm-hmm. And so God punished them for mixing with and marrying daughters of ordinary men. And he made their offspring giants and ugly and whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot to read about them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read in Number, Genesis, and other chapters
Mm-hmm.
of the Bible.
And there's talk about Nephilim now. I mean,
Yes.
When the United States went and invaded Iraq, there was stories of them going into museums and going and finding DNA of the Nephilim. I heard stories about that. So, I mean, the Nephilim, it's a legend and it's biblical and it's a story that we kind of creep out on. But you wrote this book from the perspective of a 9-year-old child.
Yes.
And so a malevolent Nephilim to a 9-year-old child is not the same as a malevolent Nephilim that might be perceived by you or I. as an adult. Does that make sense?
It does, but in my mind, after my grandmother read those scriptures to me, and the story had taken place with my neighbor, that's how I saw the pastor of his church was a Nephilim, a malevolent Nephilim.
So this story takes place in southern Colorado, which is so cool because, as I told you when we first met, that I've had so many authors that have come on and told stories of southern Colorado, northern New Mexico. So this just fits right in with with so many authors that have come before. When you were a small child, you went to live with your grandparents.
At 3 years old, I went to live with my grandmother. And then my grandfather joined us later. He had a business. He was a crop grower, so it kept him very busy.
And when you went with your grandparents, you were just like their child. I mean, they almost became your parents.
They did, and so I had I had the best of both worlds with them and my parents as well. I used to see them every weekend.
Oh, so cool! Yeah, and we talk a lot about that, about in Southwest Colorado, in our culture. It was very common for one of the family members to go and live with a tio or a tia, an aunt or an uncle, and a grandparent, and they were raised by them, and it was not unusual at all. And so it was.
It helped a big family.
It's very good for a large family, and it's also good for the grandparents because they were able to get a child, to live with them, and your grandparents had a really nice little home, and they had a neighbor who was a military veteran.
Right.
And in the book, his name is Mr. Paul.
Yes.
And he was what at those days they called it shell shock, and today we've changed that term to PTSD. And so this character, Mr. Paul, was tormented by his past. He was tormented by something that happened in the military. He had a war buddy who was killed in the military. And so as the story starts to unfold, his buddy asked him to take care of his son Silas. And so the story starts taking form as, even from page 1, you start seeing this Nephilim, or this malevolent character, becoming more and more a part of the story. When you experience these things, I mean, you talk about how this has haunted you for 60 years, over 60 years. When being a small child, how did you perceive this unfolding as compared to how it came out in the story? Talk a little bit about that.
As a child, I never really met the true pastor, but I heard about him, especially from my neighbor, Mr. Paul. And whenever he embarrassed my neighbor in church, in the congregation, for standing up and singing with the choir, he asked him to sit down. That really upset my neighbor. And in my mind, the thing that transpired between them, I blamed the pastor for embarrassing him in front of the congregation. I felt he could have called him out after church and said, "Would you please not sing with the choir?" But he was asked to sing with the choir that day because somebody was missing, they were sick, and the pastor didn't know that. But still, I didn't feel like he should have embarrassed him in front of the congregation. He was very sensitive, and he was having problems with PTSD or shell shock.
It's so interesting how we've pigeonholed military veterans over so many years. When they come back from a tour of duty, especially in combat, and we put a label on them, and I hate to say we judge them, or we perceive them in a certain way, and Mr. Paul and the character in the story, he was going through a lot of different things because he had the responsibility of taking care of this child Silas, who was growing up and eventually grew up to be the pastor in the town. and he was still dealing with all of the memories of his past. And so I think that really made his character that much more, gave him depth, in the story. When you were writing, about Mr. Paul, tell me a little bit about how his character came to be, and how did he, how was the real Mr. Paul, or his real name was Clyde? How was, describe him a little bit to me.
He was very sensitive. He was introverted, very smart, talented, very clean. He had a beautiful garden. He sang hymns. He had a great soprano voice, so they said that it was soprano. He and my grandfather hit it off immediately, so they were very good friends, and they grew their gardens.
The gardens were kind of side by side.
Right.
So
he was a good man. He didn't bother anyone, and people just, I think most of the people there liked him. They probably didn't know him that well, but because he wasn't very outgoing.
How long did he live there before things started really, going bad or going? Do you have any idea? Was that kind of just told to you through word of mouth, or do you remember?
I think he told my grandfather that he lived with his parents, and when he came back from the army, he came back into the house, and that's all I really knew. You really don't ask your grandparents anything when you're that young, and then you regret it. But I was there 4 years. I knew him 4 years before his demise.
So you really had a chance to.
He was like a second grandfather to me.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys had a really good childhood. You had a cow that you used to ride.
Bossy, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. There's a picture of you riding Bossy back in the 1950s,
right.
Which was kind of cool.
I wouldn't go near a cow today. I'd be so scared.
Yeah, me too. I'm not a cow. I'm not a horse person at all.
That's why I rode Bossy, because I didn't like horses.
A lot of the characters, as you read the book and it starts unfolding the story, there were characters who saw this side of this pastor that was very dark and that was very ominous or very almost demonic. How real were those characters? As I read the book, I kept thinking about, wow, man, and these people, saw this, and I'm sure that the real story unfolded a little different from the story. But as these characters saw all of these mysterious things begin to happen, this strange man standing by the mailbox. There's a point where your grandmother saw a man standing at the mailbox.
That was true.
Yeah, that was kind of like, ooh. As I read the book, when I get a book, I read it out loud to my wife Dee, and when we got to that point, there's a point where Luguarda, your grandmother went out or saw a man standing there, and they called Mr. Paul because her husband was not there at that time, and so he went out there to go confront this man, and he just flew away. He turned into he shape-shifted essentially.
And that was the fiction part. The first part really happened. The man was really there, and Mr. Paul did go out to talk to him. That
had to have some real chilling effects on you and on your family.
It did, because we were there by ourselves. I was 9 years old. We didn't have a phone that was hooked up. My grandfather wasn't coming for about another month. So it was just she and I and Mr. Paul there.
Was this in Fort Garland, or was this more towards Alamosa, Colorado?
On South River Road, Alamosa, Colorado.
Okay.
There are two roads there. One goes to the airport. The other one goes to the South River Road. Follows the South River Road. So we lived right there, South River Road.
If you're from the Alamosa area, South River Road. That's all still there. All that's
Rio Grande.
And it's just like this pastor had this presence about him, and I think when you were reading, I kind of put myself in your shoes and are trying to think, okay, as she's writing this,
It was hard.
Yeah, it had to have some real chilling effects on you, long-term effects because.
My back still hurts
Mm.
from the tension in
Mhm.
writing the chapters, especially one chapter in there. I don't know if I should mention it or not.
Please.
The hanging.
Oh my gosh.
That was real.
So, Mr. Paul was so tormented by this pastor in the book that he took his own life, and it's early enough in the book that it won't take away from the book, but his suicide left a lot of open questions, and it left a lot of mystery in the book, and it left, wow, the sheriff would never support Mr. Paul. He was more against him than for him, even though he'd go and try to get help from him, and the sheriff in the town was really very biased.
They believed in the pastor, and he was excellent whenever he did sermons.
He preached a great message.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But he did something different
What?
whenever he left the church.
What he did and what he said was two different things. You shall know them by their fruits. And it was interesting because even though this pastor was doing all of these devious things, he was still cherished and he was still adored by so many people in the community. It was like almost like he had this mysterious power over them. And even though there were people shouting, "He's a devil, he's a monster, and there were still people who were still saying, "No, he's not, we still love him,
Yeah.
we want him to preach the next message." And it was so reminiscent of what we see today in so many circles, because there's so many people doing such devious things, and there's such a group of people saying, "Hey, that's okay, this is the American way," or, I don't want to get off track on this, but
I know exactly what you're talking about.
and even as it got progressively worse, the people never turned away from him. They never stopped being there by his side. And I just, I saw the reality in that. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound callous,
but it happens.
it's so true.
It happens.
How do you think that happens? How do people get to a point where they're willing to overlook someone no matter how bad they are? How does that happen?
I don't understand it, and it destroys families.
Mhm.
It really does.
It divides. It creates much.
I don't think at that time in the story that I wrote that like the sheriff couldn't deal with it. He didn't know what to do,
Mhm.
so he chose not to believe it for his
Mhm.
own self-preservation.
Yes.
Mhm.
Throughout the story, the sheriff keeps coming to the aid or support of characters, or a character in the story who is malevolent, who has bad intentions, who is always doing something devious to people in the book. I really, really appreciate that through the book you inserted Daniel. Daniel, one of the characters, and Danny, or I'm sorry, Daniel and Danielle are characters who happen to be writing a book about this sort of thing that's happening. And I got to tell you, as I read that, I took my hat off to you, because what you're doing is you were essentially calling the universe to your aid. This book's going to be published. This book's going to be a movie. This book is going to be what I dream it's going to be, because I believe it's going to be, and you're manifesting that right in the pages of the book. Did you realize that?
No, not really. It wasn't until afterwards that I thought, and I really didn't think myself, but when I started getting reviews, and even people that weren't doing reviews on Amazon or anywhere else,
Mhm.
just telling me, the people that stuck with me,
Mhm.
my friends Pam and Will, who are characters in the book,
Mhm.
they were so supportive. And then my classmate Daniel,
Mhm.
he just stuck. He's a realist,
Mhm.
but at the same time he was excited, and he's the business part of this book, giving me advice.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's one of the things I wanted to talk about is if you are out there, and I talk about this every week too, if you're thinking about writing a book, it's a scary thing.
It is.
it's really frightening, especially if you've never done it before.
Well, most people will write a story and they don't think it's good enough, so they never get it published.
They never publish it.
Yeah, and great stories too.
And I talk about how many people have a book in them. Every one of us has a book in us, and so many of us leave it unpublished, leave it unwritten, and yet.
Well, when I read your book, I mean, it has such a big impression on me.
Well,
I
thank you.
wish everybody would read your book.
Guys, did you hear that? What did you like about my book?
The things that you had to go through in life, and you're still here and you're sane, you know, and you're not bitter. I mean,
it took me a long time. That was a really
yes. I mean, anybody that reads your book is going to say, "How in the world did he do this?" You know? And it's a book that everybody should read. If they don't know who they're going to be taking care of in their life.
Yeah, every 3 out of 5 of us at one time will be in need of a caregiver. Right,
and if they don't read a book like yours, they won't have time to read when they're taking care of that loved one.
And I don't want to get too much off of this, but the thing about it is I never dreamed I would write a book. I never took a writing class. I'm not college educated. I'm self-educated. I've read a lot of books. I've probably read as many or more books than most college graduates. But sometimes you have to step off that ledge. You have to take a leap of faith and just start typing.
My husband, when I was telling him about this story, he's a very gentle person. He does not like violence or dark people or dark things. He was having a hard time with it. He still can't read all of it.
Yeah.
Some people have told me that it scares them.
As I read the book and I started seeing this behavior of this character, it was just like, oh, he was almost like a thorn in the side of the entire town. And yet for a part of the town, he was a massaging, just the massaging grace for them. So it was really conflicting to see the two sides of the story from that perspective as an observer.
Well, I have to tell you that I didn't like the sheriff when I was writing it, and I didn't like the pastor rather, and I didn't capitalize their titles. And my formatter says, "You got to go back, Lydia, and capitalize. Those are important names." And I had to go all the way back and capitalize
everyone.
Yeah, because I even got into the book myself.
And that's what it should be. You should become that engrossed in your book that you're becoming
angry at my characters.
Yeah, that you become that involved. Yeah, yeah.
Or you love your characters. Yeah.
How long would you say it took you to write this book?
I've been writing it in my mind from the time I was very young.
So over 60 years. Guys.
But it took me about 3 years to get it done.
It's just a decision away. All it took for you is get a laptop and start typing, right?
It was during the pandemic. We couldn't do very much more, and my daughters just supplied me with everything that I needed to write. The computer and her technology education, and I mean, she really helped me.
Now, when you started writing this book, was it going to be a fiction book, or did you at some time think, man, I want to make this a nonfiction book? Or
well, I've always been exposed to supernatural in my family of storytellers and story writers. They talked a lot about a lot of paranormal and UFOs and anything out of the ordinary.
Yes.
So it would come natural to me. Basically, it was always there. One of my classmates says, "Your writing defines you, and you're not that kind of you're not that kind of a person."
Yeah.
And I said, "It's not a Hallmark." And they said, "I know, but maybe you should write a Hallmark next." And I said, "Oh, well, you're a hopeless romantic." I said, "I don't think I can write a Hallmark. I've never lived that kind of a life." So.
I appreciate that, because like Christina Montoya was on my show last week or 2 weeks ago, and she she wrote this fiction book, If I Never See You Again, and she stepped so far out of her comfort zone to write this book. She wrote this book from the from the eyes of a 20-something young couple, and when we're writing, that's the freedom that it gives us. It helps us to step out of who we really are and lets us be free to be. I mean, if you want to write a fantasy book, or if you want to write a book about, a mystery book or a thriller book, or, I mean, Manuel Ramos, man, he's on his, I think, 10th or 11th novel, and
Wow.
and every one of them did tell me the same thing. I didn't know what was going to be on the next page,
I didn't.
and it's really the book wrote itself.
I did, but one of the things that motivated me is I wanted to avenge my grandfather for being the hero in the real story.
Faustine.
Faustine.
Mhm.
And my neighbor for I felt he was wronged,
Mhm.
and I wanted to avenge his life. And this is the only way that I could do it legally, is to fictionalize it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Man, that's very powerful. I was writing my book. There was a hospice center called the Hospice St. John's Hospice Center. They're closed now. In my book, I wrote a story about how awful them people were. I'm going to say the man's name, Tony Trujillo. You were an evil, wicked man.
I read that. I remember. I mean, I'm still reading your book.
Okay.
I pick it up and I read segments. Although I read it almost in one overnight.
Thank you. I think everybody should read my book. I really do, because it's really it is a self-help book.
Yes.
It is a.
And there's a love story there too.
I did you think you'd ever write a book?
I know. Well, I have a lot of stories that are unpublished,
Mm-hmm.
but I never thought that I would ever put it between covers, because you're always looking for that better word. You're always looking for another synonym,
Mm-hmm.
and then you feel, oh, I don't have time. I'm too busy.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do it someday,
Mm-hmm.
and then you never do.
One of the things that challenges us is I don't know if I texted you or if I was talking to someone else, but it's called the paralysis of analysis.
Yes, I love that. Whenever you
I didn't
text it.
invent that. I actually learned that through growing up. But sometimes as we're writing, they call it writer's block. They have many different names of it. But sometimes we'll get stuck on a word. And we're looking for a synonym, and we want it to be more powerful. And sometimes that will trip us up, and that'll take weeks off of our schedule. And sometimes what we have to do, and this is the hardest thing to do, is to step back and just say, okay, I'm just going to put the word better. And I'm just thinking off,
Right.
But it is so important that our words are descriptive, that our words paint pictures, and that our words are powerful.
And I would have never written it unless that I felt like I had to have closure.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. When I finished the last chapter, something came over me. I had closure.
Mm-hmm. You had given yourself permission to close that chapter in your life, and like you said, it had haunted. This story had not just settled in your mind, but it literally haunted you in a way.
It did.
Because I remember in the beginning of the book it said it took you many years to face this and to write this story, and so I know that there are people out there. Charles Atencio, you inspire me, by the way, because Charles is in his 80s and he's written his memoir, and Ben and Litter. There's so many. Beatrice Montoya. I mean, people who are into their 70s and 80s and who have written books, and you're
78.
and you're thinking about writing another book.
Well, there's a sequel out of this one, as you know, that,
Yes.
that I left it open-ended.
Yes, you asked me this morning, what did I think about the way you closed the book? I said, I think you made perfect room for another sequel to this. So, yes, when you're writing fiction, sometimes even as you close the story, as you close the chapter, as you get to the last page, that second book is brewing up in you already, because you've almost like planted a seed of part 2.
I'll have to interview my little brother, if I do a sequel, because he lived the second part of it, of the sequel.
Mm-hmm. Have you been a writer all your life?
You know, I in elementary school, I can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think I annoyed my family by writing them too many letters. They joked that I was like a newspaper. If you want to know something, call Lydia.
Oh, yeah. So, you've always had kind of a desire to write, but you finally picked up a tablet and you finally just started writing.
And I was raised with my uncle in my grandparents' house also, and he was a story writer also.
Ah.
So he wrote lots of children's stories
Oh, cool.
about animals.
So you've had exposure to authors and writers and.
You know, we had a cousin in the family that everybody would go to his farm out in the country with no floodlights, just pitch dark, just the stars, to listen to his stories, and we had to walk back, and we were so scared. He couldn't fit us all in his car to bring us back home.
Oh man, Halloween's coming up, and so the spooky stories are coming out. I know that, you know, when we're growing up, so many things seem inflated. You know, so many things that we perceive in our lives are spookier than they really are, or they're bigger than they really are, or they're more dangerous than we really, you know, when we look back, it's like, oh, that was just a little ditch, and I thought it was a canyon, you know. And yet you've made it in a way that it, you know, it really suits you, that, you know, this story, as it unfolds, there was a lot of mystery there. There was a lot of, you know, as you turn the page, you would say, "Oh man, what's next?" You know, and I like that, because that, you know, that gave you a sense of interest in, you know, turning the page. So I like that. What advice do you have for someone who's thinking about writing a book right now? What would you say to someone who's thinking, "Man, I know I got a story." You have some stories in the Llorona book that you brought with you, Encounters with the Weeping Woman. If you were talking to someone today who was considering maybe writing a short story, what would you tell them?
Write it, edit it, proofread it, get it where you want it, but don't take so much time that you're never going to do it. You're never going to put it out there. Do your best with it, send it out there, and see what happens.
When you first started typing, did you think it was going to be a book, or was it going to be a short story, or did it just kind of take its own life?
My friends Pam and Will, I put the real summary of the real story in, on one of my sites, Southern Colorado sites, and I had a lot of feedback on that, and people wanted to know more about the story, the real story. And Pam and Will from Alamosa, they nudged me basically to change the narrative and see if I could have closure and make it a fictional book, and maybe I could have closure. And so that really helped. And they stayed, Pam stayed with me from the beginning to the end. And my friend Daniel, also my classmate, he was reading it, and I know there were times that he probably felt like screaming at me, but he stayed with me.
There were a couple of scenes, or scenes in the book that, oh my gosh, you know, all the congregation saw Pastor Silas, who transformed himself through the book. They saw him transform,
and they still didn't believe it.
And they still believed him. You know, they still supported him, and they still. And I just thought about a term that someone once said: I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and no one would care. And I just couldn't help but think this is so reminiscent of what we see in real life. And I'll leave it at that. Guys, if you're just joining us, you are watching the Weekend Boost on KUHS, the stream on Melody Drive. I am your host, Paul Lane, and we're talking to Lydia Ortiz-Avant about her book, The Malevolent Nephilim. You've written this book from the perspective of a 9-year-old girl, Nina, and in the book, Nina had psychic connections. Was that true of yourself as a child?
Not so much myself as members of my family. My mother and one of my oldest daughter. They have.
So you've seen that. You've seen that kind of energy firsthand. When you first saw that, were you a child or were you adult? Or?
I heard the stories from my mom growing up, and my daughter as she was growing up too.
So your daughter had some psychic abilities too?
She hasn't had them for quite a while, but once in a while she'll surprise me.
And there's a part of us that we don't explore that much, you know, and there's that psychic side.
And we all have it. We just don't connect with it.
We don't know how to connect to it. Yeah. Just a side note, you know, right now there's something taking place worldwide, I believe, and it's a consciousness that's taking place. There's an awareness that never was here before. There's a personal awareness. There's there's this super consciousness. You know, in his book A New Earth, Eckhart Tolle talks about a new consciousness, a new awakening that's going on, and it's a worldwide consciousness. And so I really think that this is exactly what's happening right now. Is there's this even the U.S. government has now opened up and said, yeah, UFOs are real. You know, we've been looking at them for years. You know, and
that happened a lot in the Valley when I was growing up.
yes,
Yeah.
talk about that. Talk about UFOs and your experience with UFOs.
My little brother, 9 years old, I was babysitting him, and my dad was working, coming home at lunchtime to have lunch. I was supposed to have his lunch ready. Everybody else was working somewhere else. I was babysitting two of my siblings. He walked away with his friend for a few hours, and I was so scared because I couldn't find him. The mother of the other child and I were all over town trying to find them, and we had the town looking for them. And I'm thinking my dad's going to come home for lunch. He's really going to be mad at me because my brother Steve is not home. And all of a sudden, like 3 hours later, I thought, well, they got kidnapped. A tourist must have picked them up because it's a drive-through place, you know. And so I was just going crazy. And all of a sudden, they walk up and they were crying, and they were the other child was 1 year younger. And I said, you better start crying. I said, because if you don't cry, I'm going to make you cry. You scared me so bad. Dad came and asked for you, and I said you were sleeping. And he didn't even check. I said, so now you're here. And I said, go to bed before I spank you. He slept all day. He was exhausted. And my mother came home, and she said, where's Stephen? I said, he's sleeping. How long has he been sleeping? Several hours. Oh, why did you let him sleep so long? He's not going to sleep tonight. Well, he couldn't help it. He was exhausted. But he said, we saw this great big light, and finally we were able to walk. I don't know how long we were there. And they were going to find arrowheads at the Arrowhead Ranch and the cemetery, Arrowhead Cemetery. And they did come back with some arrows. But 3 hours? And it was far away, probably a half an hour walk each way. But he, in his middle 60s now, has a vague memory. It kind of fades, but who makes that up at 9 years old?
Yeah, yeah.
And then my mother-in-law and my first husband, when he was 12, they encountered a UFO.
Down in the valley? There's a lot of activity that goes on down there. I mean, there's a lot, and you know, there's been a lot of mutilations that have gone over the years, and so yeah, being from down there, I'm guessing that you probably could see some really creepy things.
Well, we did. We used to walk in just the moonlight and the stars, and from one house to the other, out from the country to town. And at nighttime, you know, when you're that young, you just do crazy things like that. We'd see a lot of little red lights and a whole bunch of activity taking place, and we would laugh just so that we wouldn't cry. And we'd hold on to each other, and yeah. But so we just took it for granted. We just live at a place that those things happen. Maybe they happen somewhere else, but we talk about it. Nobody ever really got sick over it. I mean, we just accepted it.
Wow. So how long ago did you leave Alamosa? You've been in Denver quite a long time.
Right. I was married when I was going to be 19, and I married my classmate. And when we had our first child, we left because there were no jobs. So we came to Denver, and I've lived in Denver ever since. Okay. And I lost my first husband when he was 52, so I remarried, and Len, my today husband, he's been wonderful. He's been a wonderful support with me to make this book happen for me. He's been patient. I had plenty of time to work quietly and privately, and he never questioned it. He never demanded anything. Come down, let's go do something. He's a great support. I really gave him a lot of praise.
So it really helps to have some good
Yes.
support from your spouse and from your significant other.
And it's very lonely when you're writing.
Oh, I know. I remember, sitting down and writing, just chapters. I remember sitting on the couch there, and of course, much of my book I wrote in the hospice center. When my wife was still alive.
I read that. Yeah.
But I remember just sitting there thinking how I'm all alone, and there's no one here to read it, or no one to to give me any suggestions, and so that was a loneliness that I remember.
Yeah, and my husband basically did the same, but like I said, he's not a dark person. He doesn't like to read stories like that, But he realized what I was going through and that I had to expel that from my life.
Yes.
So he was very supportive that way, but whenever I would tell him about a scene, he would flinch sometimes and would say, "Oh, Liddy," he would call me.
Yep, that can be pretty. I remember when I was getting my book edited, when I was doing the editing, my nephew Mitchell was there, and he would sit at once I'd sit here and he'd sit here at the table, and he was going through it, and he'd go, "Okay, are you sure you want to say it that way?" And then I'd well, okay, let me go back, and I really appreciate that he would let me take a lot of my own creativity, and he wouldn't put words in there for me, which I really wanted. I mean, I wanted to make it my own works, but
Well, you need help sometimes.
having an editor is really important, especially someone that's not afraid to hurt your feelings.
Yeah.
Talk about getting your feelings hurt while you're getting your book edited. Have you done that? Did that happen to you?
Well, my family, they said, "That's not how it happened." And I said, "Okay, well, that's the fiction part of it."
That's right.
My sister said, I said, "Don't treat me like a sister. Tell me the truth." She said, "I hate to tell you this, but it scared me so bad." I said, "I'm so sorry that it scared you, Lavinia." I said, "But I'm happy that it did, because that's what a thriller is all about."
That's a compliment.
She understands it now. And also my brother said, "Well, part of it is true, but the rest are a bunch of lies." And I said, "That's what fiction's all about, Rudy." And now he's really excited about the book, and so is Lavinia.
Yeah,
So
that's exciting.
Martha, my sister Martha, I would send chapters to her so that she could read them. She said, "I'm not going to help you edit. I'm just going to read and have fun." And she would say, "You left me hanging. Now I have to wait till next week to read the other
Another chapter."
And I forgot what I read. We tease because we're, close. She's already 80 and I'm close to 80. And we tease about our memory, how we can't remember what happened in the last half hour, let alone a week from now.
Yeah.
So she would go back to the chapter to see what had happened, so that she could relate to the next chapter, because every week I would send her a chapter while I was writing it. So
it's so good to have that support system.
it really is.
On the back of every book, there's this little, I don't know if you can see that, but this little barcode right here. And I wanted to talk about, I've never talked about this on a show before, but there's a thing called the ISBN. And when you publish a book, whether it's any kind of literature, and you get it published, there has to be this little number on it. And what that does is that's a coding system on the book, and they can track how many copies have been sold. And there's so many parts to a book that we don't even, when we pick up a book, we don't even think about.
No.
The author has gone through all this. You've gone through a lot of work to put this together.
I thought writing the book and giving it to the publisher was going to be the easy part, the hard part for me. It isn't.
No, once the book's published, it's hard to get out in people's hands. It's hard to, that's where the hard.
The business part of it too. You have to fill out the forms for IRS, for taxes and things like that. I had to do a lot of research to make sure that everything I was writing matched the times back then.
So writing historical fiction can be really difficult. Yeah, Kimberly Sanchez wrote a book from the 1500s.
Wow.
That it's an epic novel that goes on, to modern day times. And when she was on the show, by the way, she's a Kalman member too, Kimberly. She talked about all of the research that had to be done and how much more detail had to be verified than on a nonfiction book. And so, when someone writes a fiction book, especially a book that took place in the past, I really value and appreciate that so much more now than when I started doing this show, because you have to really, if you're talking about a model of car, if it had a seatbelt or didn't have a seatbelt, you don't want to incorrectly put that in the book, because it's going to get shredded.
Right. And my grandfather's speech in the book, that's how he talked. He didn't. Those were his words whenever he got angry. So
Faustine was really an advocate for this Mr. Paul, who was, throughout the book was victimized, was brutalized, was just, really treated poorly by not only the sheriff but by this Pastor Silas.
And he wanted so badly to connect with Pastor Silas, the son of his
comrade.
yeah. And
So-
also he became friends with his mother, Silas's mother, Ruth.
Ruth, yes.
Yeah, they were very close.
There's a part in the book where aliens actually come into the story. Actually, there's several parts in it, and as I read it, I thought, wow, I mean, that could happen there in Alamosa. I mean, if there's any place, like that Fort Garden and all that area, when you drive down there, man, it's there. It's the middle of nowhere.
If you're driving there at nighttime, it can get pretty scary.
Oh man, I know it's dark. It's beautiful.
And
but-
Las Salsas, if you're driving to Las Salsas at nighttime, there's a lot of stories there, paranormal stories.
It's really scary.
Well, even today, all the murders that took place down there not too long ago, it's scary to go drive down there when you think about what happened there just recently.
If someone wanted to read this book or to get a hold of this book, where can they find this book?
They can go to Amazon and type in the title of the book and my name, Lydia Ortiz Avant, and it comes right up.
So they can find that on Amazon.
They can, and also I think it's print on demand. Barnes & Noble also in the United States, and it's on 100 plus channels throughout the world.
Oh wow! So you've really done some marketing. How did you go about that? Did you have someone help you, or did you?
My publishers.
Oh, you have okay. Your
They-
publishers.
that's what you pay them for.
Mm-hmm.
So they've done a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime that I had a problem with a book, the consultant, Carlos, he was right there, making sure that my questions got answered and everything that I needed got done.
Mm.
So it's a great publishing company.
So writing a book is a lot like building a company. I mean, you have people who are proofreading your book. You have people who are editing your book. You have people who are giving their opinions of the book as you write it. You have accounting people that are involved in it. You have publishing people that are involved in it. And so writing a book is a collaboration. Writing a book is much more than just sitting down and start typing pages. But that's not, that shouldn't scare you. Don't let that scare you.
Write your book, focus on that. Focus on your story first.
Yes.
And the rest will just automatically come in with the help of all these people that you hire.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that, I mean, we talked yesterday, you talked to someone who possibly can take this to the next level, make it into a movie.
Yes. He, recently there was a company from Denver, Littleton, I think, that went down there to film a movie in the San Luis Valley, and they had the streets that were sectioned off. My friends down there told me it was happening. And he owns 2 Airbnbs down there, so the filming crew and the cast were there in his Airbnbs. So he still, I think he's still connected with them, and so he told me that he was going to talk to them after he reads my book. So that's pretty exciting. But on top of that, he knows a lot of people down there, and we determined that even he and I could be related down in, because his family is from the San Luis Valley and all around the hub of Alamosa, but he lives here, and he's young and very, very smart and very animated about this book, and his own cousin wrote a book, so he's pretty excited about that too.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So surrounding ourselves with a group of people who support us is most important. I mean, it's so critical that you have a team that really is behind you, that believes in you, that supports you. Did you have naysayers as you wrote this book?
Not yet, but
Very good.
I expect to, and even if you have a bad review, it's learning.
That's right.
You learn from everything, and it'll take you to the next book, and then you know what maybe you shouldn't do, or so.
But you're in your 70s. You can write another book, can't you?
I could, but I probably will dictate the next one.
There you go. But no, I guess what I'm trying to say is, guys, I don't care if you're a young man or woman, I don't care if you're middle-aged, I don't care if you're old, I don't care if you're advanced in years. Guys, it's not impossible that a work of creative work is inside you. It's not unlikely that a book can't, I mean, it's likely that a book could be written by you. I mean, you're free, you know, you have your fingers, you have your brain, you have your eyes. If you have a laptop, I mean, guys, get started. I want you on the show.
Yes. You want to interview with Paul? He's fantastic.
I paid her for that. Just kidding. So what we have to do is we have to make a decision. If we're going to make a book, guys, it's up to you. You can write a book. You really can. There's a book in you, and it could be a thriller. It could be a mystery. It could be a drama. It could be a romance. It could be historical fiction, historical fact, whatever. You know, there's no limit. It could be a horror story, and it's in you, and all you got to do is just reach in there and find it.
Well, I read that if somebody buys my copyright, there might be a chance that they want me to continue writing for them after they buy the copyright, and that I'm unsure of whether if I can do something like that or not.
Hey, then the world's the world's your oyster. When you did transitions in the book, did you struggle with those? I'm trying to think of an example. There was a scene where there was a great big party, and I can't remember if Pastor Silas showed up in the movie, and then the whole town got all shook up,
Let's see. He was. The party was for Mr. Paul. He came home on furlough.
From the mental.
From the mental institution.
Yeah. Yes.
And the town had gotten together, especially the countryside, to make a big party for him.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Silas, came and ruined it.
Mm-hmm.
But he did not ruin Pam and Will's wedding, because she
said, "I'll bring the torches out."
Yeah. And that's how she got rid of him.
Yeah, the fire, the flame.
The flame.
And so when you're doing transitions like that, do you? I don't know. For me, I had when I'm writing something, or when I was writing my book, and I'd have a transition from a chapter to another chapter, I'd have to really ponder that. I'd have to really, sometimes I'd go back and I'd read that chapter, and then I'd say, okay, where do I go from here? How do I gather my thoughts?
You got to make sure you've got all your characters doing something.
Yes.
You can't leave them behind.
Mm-hmm. Did you start out with a storyboard, or did you start out with a stack of notes that you had, or
I'm
did you
not
just?
that disciplined.
Yeah, there's no wrong answers. So many authors write from different viewpoints or from different starting points, and so it's interesting to ask about how did you collect your thoughts and how did you gather all this, and I know that this is an exception because your story was already in your spirit, in your mind from your childhood, and so you really were able to just draw upon that and
I did.
and really build on it.
Well, and I think I collect characters all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I look at somebody, and there's always something you can learn about the people you meet.
Mm-hmm.
And you have characters there,
Mm-hmm.
if you remember them,
Yes, every character had a personality. Every character was, even the dog Bobby.
And I have a picture of Bobby, by the way. I don't know if I brought it today or not. Let me see. That was not put in that book, but I also have the book that's a family book, and that's Bobby right there.
Oh, okay. So I don't know if you can see that all, but Bobby was a character in the book that was he told him when there was a bad spirit in the house. It was kind of interesting because dogs and animals always are able to perceive those kind of weird things.
Yeah.
Do you believe that it's possible you might write a second book?
I've got a second book in me,
Mm-hmm.
sequel to this.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I'll have to interview my little brother because
Mm-hmm.
he lived the second part of the curse. I left and he moved in with my grandmother
Oh,
after my
really?
grandfather died, yeah.
So he was able to see that.
That next curse take place.
Wow.
Now both of those homes, my grandparents' home is not standing anymore, and neither is Mr. Paul's house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That made me sad when I went down there last summer to go visit that area while I was still writing.
Mm-hmm.
I was sad to see that those houses no longer stand.
Yeah.
But there's new development there.
Progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Everywhere you go, you see.
I also
exactly
met Pam and Will, my star characters in the book. I met them.
Ah.
They're awesome.
Very cool. These characters, it's interesting that many of these characters are real people, you know, and so as you read the book, these characters, I mean, their personality is not just a fictional part of the book, you know, it's really true. I mean, of course, they didn't see the, you know, the fictional parts of the book, but they still saw the darkness. They still saw that you know, Paul. They saw Mr. Paul. They saw you know, the town feeling that heaviness that was around, you know, and so it's interesting. It's just interesting that all of this was really put together in the way it was.
Well, it's kind of hard to see something and somebody else really close to you doesn't see the same thing, and in the end, the sheriff had a hard time admitting. He knew way before, but he just didn't know how to handle it. And he told his dog about it.
And he was basically just following around, going along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. Many of the characters in the book were that way. They didn't fully grasp the seriousness of what was going on.
Yeah, and can you imagine that could really be going on, and how do you grasp it? I mean, how?
Man, I'll tell you what, more and more stories are coming out about, you know, about supernatural things, about energies that we never perceived, about beings that we never thought could be there, and
we're right in the middle of it, but we're all too busy.
And we're all too busy, you know. I mean, I listen to a lot of psychics and people who talk about when deceased loved ones reach out to us and want to talk to us, and how we don't even hear them. You know, we don't even know that they're talking to us.
And for that reason, some people are blessed not to be able to see that. That wasn't the case for me after my first husband died. It was not the case for me.
How do you mean?
I was forced to listen to what he had told me. He said when he was dying, he said, if there's a hereafter, I will let you know.
And what happened?
Oh my goodness. Too many stories, Paul. There's one particular one that still haunts me because nobody could have known. And then a psychic moved right next door to me and brought them all to me. I was so glad when he moved out of that building because I thought I was going to die, you know, from just exhaustion.
Yeah,
So,
it just drains you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember my wife would, when she was in her wheelchair, we'd go by the light switch in the hallway and she'd reach up real slow. And she would put her hand on it, but she couldn't turn the light switch on or off, and so I would help her. And every night she would do that. And then she finally, you know, passed away. And as long as I lived in that house, that hallway light would turn on and then turn off. Turn on and then turn off.
It happened.
And so it was like, ooh, yeah, there's things in this world we don't understand. I'm really excited for your book. I'm really excited that you're finding people who are taking this book to the next level. I mean, finding someone who could take this and make this into a movie, you know, I think that it's exciting.
And I have to credit the people from El Teatro who I met when I was in my 40s. Deborah Gallegos, when she found out I wrote the book, she says, I'm going to set you up with some people with Calma and people that will really help you with this book. And boy,
Wow.
that's been a blessing. And
So-
from there, I keep going, finding other people that they're not physical, or they don't know each other, but somehow they connect whenever they hear about one another.
Yeah, and it's networking, and it's a small world. And you know, guys, if you are out there and you're watching the show and you're thinking maybe a book is in you, don't hesitate, man. Don't wait till tomorrow. I mean it. Write page 1. Call me back in 2 weeks and tell me, hey, I got a chapter written. I got 2 chapters written. You know, there's no wrong way to do it. There's no wrong answers. Just start writing.
I have an acquaintance right now who said that she has a story and she's got a great title. But she says, but I'm not computer savvy. I can't do this. And I told her, well, we have grandchildren. And she has a granddaughter that she thinks can help her. I said, do it. I said, don't let it go. Do it.
Yeah.
And she's having, you know, some obstacles taking place right now in her life. But I'm going to keep reminding her that she can do it, because you can even pay a ghostwriter to write your outline, to write your story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, we have been talking to Lydia Ortiz Avant about her book, The Malevolent Nephilim. It's a thriller. It's a fictional thriller, available on Amazon. Guys, take a look at this book. Tell us what you think. Order it on Amazon today. If someone would like to get an autographed copy, is that a possibility?
I am going to be scheduled to do a book signing at Barnes & Noble. We're working on it. The manager and I are working on it. I don't know exactly when it'll happen. I probably have to order books so that I can supply the store while there's a book signing. I'm going to try to invite my contacts and see if on that particular day they're able to come down. And if they already have a book, I'll sign it for them.
Let us know when that happens so we can announce it on the show.
Okay.
The other book that you brought in, and we're almost out of time, but you have an entry in the book La Llorona, Encounters with the Weeping Woman.
And I want to give a lot of praise to the author of that book, Judith Shaw Beatty, because she gave me I have 2 stories in her book. She compiled it, and she gave me a very nice praise for my stories in there. She said I was a prolific writer, so she kind of pushed me too.
That's cool. That's nice to get that kind of encouragement.
Yeah, so we kind of support each other, and I try to promote her book too because she's a genius. She's talented.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we are about out of time. You have been watching the Weekend Boost on KUHS, the stream on Melody Drive. We've been talking to Lydia Ortiz Avant about her book, The Malevolent Nephilim. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We will be back in 2 weeks to talk to you. At this point, I don't know who's going to be my guest, but I promise you we will be working on getting a very, very good guest for you, as we always try our best to do. But stay tuned, guys, because we have Paul Chavez, Mr. International, coming up, I believe, on Deep Cuts. And we thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.